Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to unpack a really pivotal moment in world history. India gaining its independence from the British Empire.
Yeah, it's a massive story.
Absolutely. We'll be looking at the key events, the big players, the ideas that, really shaped everything.
It's a complex process, decolonization, lots of moving parts.
Exactly. And we know listeners are interested in understanding these big historical shifts, so let's jump right in.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, maybe first, just briefly, the British Empire itself. What was it, and why was India so, well, central to it?
Right. So the British Empire was this enormous global network of territories controlled by Britain. Think colonies, dominions, all over the map.
Huge.
Yeah, massive. And India. India was often called the jewel in the crown. It was incredibly important.
Why, though? Resources.
Resources, definitely. Cotton, tea, spices, you name it. Huge source of wealth, but also a massive market, a place to sell British manufactured goods.
Okay, so economic engine, basically.
Pretty much. And prestige, too. Holding India gave Britain immense power and status on the world stage. It was symbolic.
Got it. So Britain's got this prized possession, but obviously people in India started wanting, well, self-rule,
Naturally. And that leads us to groups like the Indian National Congress.
like the INC. Tell us about them. They were pretty central, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely central. Founded back in the late 1800s, interestingly, their initial goal wasn't full independence right away.
Oh, what was it then?
More about getting a greater say for Indians within the existing British system. More representation, more involvement in government.
Okay, so starting with reforms.
Exactly. But as time went on and the desire for self-determination grew stronger, the Congress evolved. It really became the main vehicle, the leading voice, pushing for complete independence.
So they adapted their goals.
They did. They became this major platform for organizing resistance and demanding freedom.
Now, there was another key group, the Muslim League. How did they fit in? Were they on the same page as Congress?
Well, yes and no. The Muslim League formed a bit later, early 1900s. Their primary concern was safeguarding the interests and rights of the Muslim minority in India.
Okay, a focus on minority rights.
Precisely. They sometimes cooperated with Congress against the British, but there was also growing unease, a fear that in an independent, Hindu-majority India, Muslim political power might be, well, diminished.
Ah, so potential future tensions were already brewing.
Definitely. And that fear eventually led the League down the path of advocating for a separate Muslim nation.
We'll definitely come back to that. So you have these movements growing, but then the British response, things like the Rowlatt Act, really inflamed the situation, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. The Rowlatt Act of 1919 was a major turning point for the worse, you could say.
What did it do?
It essentially gave the British authorities in India the power to arrest people suspected of sedition or revolutionary activity and lock them up without trial, indefinitely in some cases.
Wow, okay. So suspending basic legal rights.
Exactly. No trial, no due process. It sparked massive outrage across India. People saw it as incredibly repressive, a sign that Britain would clamp down hard to maintain control.
And that anger boiled over tragically at Amritsar, right? The massacre.
Yes, the Amritsar massacre, just weeks after the Rowlatt Act, also in 1919. It's a horrific event.
What actually happened?
British troops, under the command of General Dyer, opened fire on a large, peaceful, and unarmed crowd of Indians gathered in a walled garden area called Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar.
Unarmed and peaceful.
Yes. They were protesting the Rowlatt Act and the arrest of pro-independence leaders. The troops blocked the main exit and just fired into the dense crowd. Hundreds were killed, many more wounded.
That's just chilling. The impact must have been immense.
Immense is understatement. It utterly shattered any lingering faith many Indians might have had in British justice or goodwill. It became this potent symbol of colonial brutality.
Did it push people towards more radical action? Like, okay, negotiation isn't working.
Absolutely. For many, Amritsar was the point of no return. It fueled the demand for full independence like never before and really unified people against British rule.
Yes.
It showed the stark reality of the power imbalance.
And it's around this time, or shortly after, that Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi really steps up as a major leader, right?
Yes, Gandhi becomes incredibly influential in the decades following these events. His approach was quite unique.
His philosophy of nonviolence.
Exactly. Satyagraha, he called it. Truth force, essentially. It was about resisting injustice, but through strictly nonviolent means. Civil disobedience, protests, non-cooperation.
Why was that so powerful, do you think?
Well, a few reasons. It offered a moral high ground. It allowed, crucially, mass participation. You didn't need weapons. Ordinary people, men, women, everyone could actively participate in the struggle. It was empowering.
So taking the fight beyond just politicians or militants.
Precisely. He combined this deep moral conviction with really astute political strategy.
Let's talk about that strategy. Civil disobedience, what did that look like in practice?
It meant deliberately and peacefully breaking laws that were considered unjust.
Okay, like what kinds of laws?
It could be refusing to pay certain taxes, like the salt tax we'll probably get to. It could be holding peaceful demonstrations or marches even when the authorities ban them, or openly defying discriminatory rules.
And the key was nonviolence, even if arrested.
Absolutely key. Accepting the consequences, including imprisonment, without retaliating. The idea was to expose the injustice of the law and challenge the moral authority of the rulers.
Okay, I see. Another tactic was the boycott, right? Refusing to buy British goods.
Yes, the boycott or Swadeshi movement was a powerful economic weapon.
How did that work?
Indians were urged to stop buying imported British products, especially textiles, which was a huge British industry. Instead, they were encouraged to use locally made goods, particularly hand-spun, hand-woven cloth called khadi.
Cuddy, Gandhi and the spinning wheel symbol.
Exactly. It was about hitting Britain economically, making them feel the pinch, but also about promoting Indian self-sufficiency and pride in their own industries. It was a very direct way for everyone to contribute.
So economic pressure alongside the moral pressure of civil disobedience.
Right. And that brings us neatly to the Salt Acts and the famous Salt March. Why was salt such a big focus? Seems so basic.
It is basic, and that was precisely the point. The British government had a legal monopoly on the production and sale of salt.
Meaning only they could make and sell it.
Yes, and they levied a hefty tax on it. Since everyone needs salt, rich or poor, this tax hit everyone, but especially the poorest Indians. It was a deeply resented symbol of British control over a necessity of life.
Okay, so universal grievance.
Exactly. So in 1930, Gandhi decided to challenge this directly. He led a group of followers on a march, walking over 240 miles to the Arabian seacoast.
The Dandi March, right?
That's the one, the Salt March to Dandi.
Yeah.
When they arrived, Gandhi symbolically broke the law by picking up natural salt from the seashore, effectively making his own salt and encouraging others to do the same.
Yes. Millions across India started making or selling salt illegally in defiance. It was a massive act of civil disobedience. It captured global attention and showed the world the depth of Indian resistance. Just a brilliant piece of political theater, really.
A simple act,
Right.
but hugely symbolic. Now, we touched on it earlier, but we need to delve into the growing Hindu-Muslim tensions during this period.
Yes, it's a crucial and ultimately tragic part of the story. India has always been religiously diverse, with a large Hindu majority and a very significant Muslim minority.
And they had coexisted for centuries.
They had, with periods of both cooperation and conflict, like anywhere. In the independence movement, there were times of unity against the common British enemy, but political and religious differences began to sharpen.
Why then? What changed?
Several factors. Concerns among some Muslims, amplified by the Muslim League, about their status and political power in a future independent India dominated by the Hindu majority. There were disputes over representation, language, cultural issues, and sometimes, sadly, these tensions were exploited by political leaders on all sides, including the British, some argue.
The old divide and rule idea.
Elements of that, perhaps. But the concerns about minority rights were also genuinely felt by many Muslims.
And the figure most associated with articulating those concerns and pushing for a separate state is Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Yes, Jinnah became the undisputed leader of the Muslim League. Interestingly, earlier in his career, he was actually known as an ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity.
Oh, really? So he changed his stance quite dramatically.
He did. Over time, perhaps through disillusionment with the Congress Party or a growing conviction about irreconcilable differences, he became convinced that Muslims needed their own nation to ensure their political, economic, and cultural security.
So he became the main proponent of Pakistan.
Yes. He championed the two-nation theory, the idea that Hindus and Muslims were fundamentally two distinct nations, and led the campaign for the creation of Pakistan as a separate homeland for Muslims. His stance hardened considerably in the years leading up to independence.
Which leads us inexorably to partition. Just the word itself carries so much weight. What exactly was it?
Partition in 1947 was the division of British India into two independent Dominion states, the Union of India and the Dominion of Pakistan. Pakistan itself was split into two parts, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which later became Bangladesh, separated by Indian territory.
And the basis for the division was primarily religious.
Primarily, yes. Areas with a Muslim majority were generally allocated to Pakistan and Hindu majority areas to India. But the lines were drawn quite hastily, cutting through provinces like Punjab and Bengal where populations were deeply intermixed.
Hasty. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. The announcement of the borders triggered one of the largest and most violent mass migrations in human history. Millions of Muslims trekked towards Pakistan, and millions of Hindus and Sikhs moved towards India.
Amidst violence.
Terrible, widespread communal violence, riots, massacres, abductions. Estimates vary, but hundreds of thousands, perhaps even up to 2 million people, lost their lives. Millions were displaced and lost everything. It was an absolute human catastrophe alongside the joy of independence.
Just unimaginable suffering. A moment of freedom completely overshadowed.
Deeply intertwined, yeah. Liberation and trauma, side by side.
So independence arrives, but at this terrible cost. Who were the key figures leading the newly independent India?
Well, the towering figure for India was Jawaharlal Nehru. He had been a key leader in the Congress for decades, a close associate of Gandhi, though they didn't always agree on everything.
And he became the first prime minister.
Yes, India's first prime minister, a role he held for 17 years. He really shaped India's early path, focusing on building a modern, secular, democratic nation with a planned economy. A major architect of independent India's foreign policy, too.
A huge responsibility. And on the British side, overseeing this final, tumultuous handover.
That was Lord Louis Mountbatten, the last viceroy of British India.
What was his role exactly?
He was sent by the British government in early 1947 with the specific task of transferring power. He developed a close relationship with Nehru, but less so with Jinnah. He made the critical decision to bring forward the date of independence significantly.
Why? Why rush it?
The argument was that the situation was deteriorating too rapidly, civil unrest was escalating, and a swift handover was needed to prevent complete chaos. However, many historians argue that this rush contributed massively to the violence and chaos of partition, as the mechanisms for division weren't properly in place.
So his actions are quite controversial then.
Very controversial. He played a pivotal role in the final act, overseeing both independence and the partition plan, but the speed and manner in which it happened remain heavily debated.
Okay, so wrapping this massive story up,
Yeah.
if you had to summarize the key factors that finally led to India's independence after centuries of struggle.
It's a confluence of things, really. Decades of persistent, organized nationalist struggle, primarily led by the Congress, the unique and powerful leadership of Gandhi, introducing mass civil disobedience.
Right, the nonviolent resistance.
Exactly. Then there were galvanizing events like Amritsar that hardened resolve. Also, the growing strength and demand of the Muslim League under Jinnah, forcing the issue of partition.
So internal pressures were key.
Hugely. And externally, Britain was significantly weakened after World War II, both economically and militarily. Their capacity and perhaps their will to hold on to the empire was diminished. It all sort of came together in that post-war period.
A long, complex, often painful journey.
Absolutely. A story of incredible resilience, sacrifice, political maneuvering, but also immense tragedy.
It really makes you think. Yeah. Considering everything we've discussed, the strategies, the leadership, the immense challenges, the violence of partition, what lessons, if any, can we draw from India's path to independence when we look at other processes of decolonization or nation building around the world?
That's a big question, isn't it? Something to definitely mull over. The complexities are just staggering.
Indeed. Well, thanks for guiding us through this incredibly important and complex deep dive.
My pleasure. It's a history everyone should know something about.